Rev up your engines!
Well, you ever wonder what happened with Lordstown, those electric vehicle makers? Well, they're pretty much down the toilet. The NASDAQ just delisted their stock because for so many days it was under $1 a share, and they're delisting the stock. Now, the company basically has proven to be a joke. Now, Lordstown went public on the NASDAQ in 2020, and since then it's gone down the toilet. Now, last November, Lordstown said they had 500 of them they delivered, right? 500 of them? But this is November. In February, they had to halt production because their quality control was crap. They were making junk and had to recall them. Voluntarily, they said, right? I mean, it's just another one of these fantasy electric car companies that, oh, we're jumping on the bandwagon. Well, that was 2020 when they started. It's only the beginning of 2023, and already they've been delisted by NASDAQ, which pretty much says you're a garbage stock, and they're thinking about doing a reverse stock split. So basically, stay away from Lordstown Motors if I were you. Would do a reverse stock split to try to keep the stock up? No. It's like the ship is sinking. Abandoned ship. Lordstown is no more. Don't throw good money after bad. Electric car fantasy is starting to come apart for a lot of these companies. And it's only begun. I mean, it's still not even close to being mainstream electric vehicles. These guys are already falling by the wayside. And there are probably going to be a whole bunch of them following them, too. Ray-B862 says, my Chrysler 300 doesn't turn on, it just dies. I've changed the fuel pump, canister purge valve has a new battery. I fill up my gas tank and then it started to add bad. I thought it was bad gas. I switched it on and it still does. I also realized my battery is dead in the morning. That is a real good clue. If your battery is dead in the morning, you have some kind of electrical problem. Start up by watching my video, Fixing Battery Drain in Your Car, Scotty. Watch that on YouTube. You can see all the things that can drain your battery. If your battery is drained first thing in the morning, you don't have enough electricity in the car. A lot of times they will not run correctly. Cars today are all computerized. And if your car's battery doesn't put out a certain parameter of electrical voltage, it can crank, but it may not start, or it'll start and it'll die. Since it's dead in the morning, start with the obvious thing. Now, on the other hand, you said you thought somebody said you had bad gas. That's kind of rare. And you said you got rid of the bad gas. Well, if you really did have bad gas, you're going to have to change the fuel filter too inside the gas tank. You're going to have to change that. You might have to change the pump too if you really got bad gas. But often you don't get bad gas. That's like the biggest excuse on earth. It's got bad gas. That's the problem. Very rarely do you get bad gas today in the United States. Other countries, India, yeah, they got bad gas supplies. Dirt, crud gets in it, but not in the United States. The gas supply is pretty good. People normally don't get bad gas very often. Tallest67 says, I got an 07 Chevy Tahoe, have a misfire in cylinder 6. A mechanic said there's no compression in cylinder number 6. He said I need a new motor. Now, why could I fix it without replacing the motor? What makes it do that? If he did it correctly, took out the spark plug, did a compression test, you know, if any compression in that cylinder, something's broken in that cylinder. Valve's broken on the head, piston broke, something serious. You're going to have to tear the engine down. You didn't say what kind of mileage. It's an 07, so I assume it's high mileage. If you're going to rebuild an old engine, it costs so much money to do it correctly. You just don't fix one thing. Because let's say it's got a bad piston ring on that cylinder on number 6. That means all the other ones are somewhat worn too. So you can't just replace the one. You'd have to rebuild the whole engine. It would cost a fortune. In your case, you got two choices that make any sense at all. One would be try to find a good used engine. There's plenty of engines out there in junkyards. Put a used engine in. Or have a remanufactured, rebuilt engine put in. Because from my experience, guys don't really know that much about fixing them correctly anymore. They'll do a half-assed job. Like I said, maybe they'll put piston rings on one cylinder and it'll run, but the rest of the engine's worn out. When it comes to engines, either do the whole thing or get rid of the vehicle. You could take a gamble with the used engine, or put a remanufactured engine in, or just get rid of the vehicle. There's no cheap fix for that. Rob9230 says, why did a single spark plug fall out on a low mileage engine? I got a 2014 Acura TL V6. I only have 10,000 miles. No work was done to the engine except changing the oil filter. It started missing. It was cylinder number 1, so I replaced the spark plug and coil. Now the tip of the spark plug is carboned up. Why did this happen? Generally, Acura makes very good engines, but that one cylinder has crud on it. You got an engine problem in that cylinder. You got built up carbon on that one plug. Something went wrong. Maybe they didn't build that piston ring. It's got a cracked piston ring or something. If you got carbon, it means it's burning oil. No way a 2014 Acura TL should burn oil. And just for giggles, take all the other 5 spark plugs. If they're all normal, but that one isn't, you got a problem in that and you just got screwed over. You got yourself a car that they didn't build the engine correctly. It happens, and piston rings can go bad. If you want to see what it is for sure, do a wet and dry compression test of the engine. So if you do a wet compression test, and the compression's real high, and then dry, it's low, that means the piston rings are gone for sure. If it doesn't make that much difference, wet and dry, that would mean that that you got a problem with the valves in the engine, because adding oil isn't going to help the compression if the valve's cracked or something's broken in the valve, because that's a metal piece that's broken. Oil isn't going to cover up a little hole there, but it will seal piston rings because they're tight in the engine. A little bit of oil on it will seal it, make the pressure go up when you do the test. But you got an engine problem, sad but true. With that kind of mileage, it should never happen, 10,000 miles, but in your case, it has. So do a compression test, try to figure out what's going on. 87 Rattle says, my Highlander randomly shuts down. I got no 4 Highlander. It ran fine, but now it randomly shuts down, and I see the gauges drop to 0. Everything's been checked. What do you think it could be? You say everything goes to 0. It could be a simple thing. Your ignition switch could be shorting out. Buy a new ignition switch, just the electrical part, replace it. If that fixes it, you can thank me for a cheap fix, because if it goes to 0, you're losing power. Now, of course, you can lose power if you got an electric short in any of the wires. Check them all for looseness, tightness. Could be your battery terminal's loose. Who knows? You know, tighten everything. Look for corrosion. Now, it can't be the battery, because you say then it starts right up. If it was the battery, it'd go to 0 and die, but then it wouldn't start because there's no power left. Either your switch is going bad or you got a wiring short somewhere. So check, go through all the wiring. Probably a loose wire somewhere. If it's not the ignition switch, but change the switch first. It's random. It could be the switch is starting to go out, and it's so easy to just bolt one off, bolt another one on. For an 04 Highlander, any discount auto parts store can get you electrical portion of the ignition switch cheaply enough. And change that first. If not that, then trace the electrical wiring, because you got to have some kind of corrosion or short somewhere that's shutting it off. Because everything goes to 0. That means you lost power to the dash. Well, even some of the House Democrats are starting to wonder about Joe Biden. He refuses to meet with the Congress leader because they're saying, hey, we got to raise the debt ceiling. And the Republicans are saying, okay, well, if you want to raise the debt ceiling, you're going to have to start cut some of the spending that you're doing, which of course they don't want to do. They want to just spend. As I said in a previous video, years ago, my brother-in-law, who taught economics, told me, he says, Scott, they can't raise the interest rates very high because the federal government's borrowed money. They work on borrowed money. And back then, the interest rate was like 0.15% for the federal government to borrow money. Well, now that it costs a lot more to borrow, the government actually is insolvent. It is bankrupt. They can't pay back the money they're borrowing. They can't even pay the interest on it now. They just want to raise the debt. So we'll just go further in debt. The Republicans are saying, hey, you're going to have to cut some costs. You can't keep just giving this money away. Like, just keep raising the debt ceiling. The literal crap is going to hit the fan. You can't just keep borrowing, get more and more in debt, and spend more and more and more. It doesn't work. I mean, if you want an analogy, Ronald Reagan was president for 8 years, and they did all kinds of deficit spending where they didn't want to tax, but they kept spending. A lot of corporate spending. Government gave corporations tons of money during the Reagan administration. After 8 years of that, George Bush, the first, gets elected. He's a one-termer because he said, read my lips, no more taxes, no new taxes, right? Well, they had to have new taxes because they had spent all this money and they had lowered taxes. Well, in this case, you can't just keep raising the debt ceiling without stopping giving money away for everything. It's got to be paid for somehow, right? Biden's solution is, well, I won't even meet with the guy. I'll just pretend everything's fine, you know? Just what we need, you know? It kind of looks like he's going to be just like George Bush, the first, a one-term president, because the economy's starting to go, and when it goes, these guys don't have any kind of solutions other than we'll raise the debt ceiling. No, you got to start curtailing spending, just like their IRA thing that was going to, it's the Inflation Reduction Act. If anything, it's created more inflation by giving more money to corporations, and then things just cost more and more and more. It's not lowering inflation, it's actually raising inflation. It's the exact opposite of they say what it's going to do. You can't just keep spending money, because if you keep spending money and raising the debt, money's worth less and inflation gets even worse. I mean, some of these guys need a little course in basic economics. I mean, my brother-in-law knew that years ago and he hit the nail on the head. Now they just want to keep raising the debt ceiling and pretend, we'll just keep spending money. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine. No, it's not fine. They got to go way back to like Truman when he says that buck stops here. Yeah, the buck has to stop somewhere, because you can't just keep throwing it around, giving it away, or you'll end up having houses like in some places in Canada where our average house is $900,000 because they're just printing money and giving money away. You can't do it forever. Eventually, it comes home to roost, and somebody's got to pay the piper. It'll always be middle-class people like us that are paying it, right? So we should have something to say about it. Like, hey, why don't you just stop throwing money away like water all the time and say, yes, it's great. We'll throw money away like water. The water's got to come from somewhere. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.